Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Let's go to Washington, D.C. today, okay? I think that's where Georgetown University is, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
We're going to talk about peace education. And I should have a lot to say to this guy because I was doing peace education myself for 25 years at a university, and he is at Georgetown University teaching every day. This is Tony Jenkins. His other job is with the Global Campaign for Peace Education and
International Institute on Peace Education.
All right. Okay. So, hi, Tony. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Meta. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about the organization. Is it just you or
Well, the various organizations, a mix of different people. We could start with, we'll start with the oldest one, which is the International Institute on Peace Education, because that goes back much further than the Global Campaign. The Institute was founded at Teachers College, Columbia University back in 1982. And it was kind of launched primarily as more of an academic seminar, but what it tried to do is bring together academics across the campus to bring diverse educational perspectives to understanding and trying to figure out the problem of nuclear proliferation. What has happened with the Institute over the years, it's really kind of grown and evolved to take on violence much more broadly. I mean, obviously, it's still looking at the issues of militarism, war, disarmament. Those also, being very kind of foundational to the work that we do. But it also zooms out and looks at various, cultural and structural forms of violence and looking at educational strategies to address those. And the way the Institute works now, it's no longer a teachers college; it's an independent initiative. But every other year, we host an in-person intensive event in a different country, working with local NGOs or university partners who specialize in peace education. And we bring roughly 60 to 70 educators, researchers, activists, academics from around the world into sort of, I like to think of it as a learning laboratory where we're really experimenting and exchanging ideas and learning from each other. And the intention is really to help us kind of grow and advance the field of peace education in theory and practice.
So you bring together people who are already professionals working in the field. And I didn't even know that. How come I didn't go?
Well, it's never too late.
It's a little late. I've been retired for 20 something years. So.
But you could have a lot to offer. I would say, when we host our institute, we do certainly attract a lot of people who are currently practitioners or generally knowledgeable to begin with. But we do try to bring in a mix of experience and new people to exchange ideas. We need to learn from the new generations. They have very different views and attitudes and grown up with different systems and struggles than we have. So we need to have their voices too.
I've been retired for 24 years or something. I wouldn't know that. What can you say about how they're different?
Well, I think generational attitudes and worldviews of the younger generations aren't as hampered by certain cultural and social assumptions and norms around violence and things of this nature. We could look to, I think one of the things that stands out the most in recent years would be the younger generation's attitude towards issues related to race and structural racism and their deep awareness of that as a problem, something that generationally we I think, I'm still learning and catching up on, right? Or certain views and attitudes around gender norms and assumptions have been radically transformed. And a lot of that has been through, I think the really kind of courageous perspectives and attitudes of younger generations. And us older generations who have had these deeply entrenched worldviews about these things are much slower to change. Those things happen, right?
Okay, well, that sounds like a whole different conversation that I ought to organize sometime to listen to people who represent those different points of view.
Yeah.
Maybe that has come up without my knowing it in some of the shows that I've already done where we've argued about something, but I wouldn't have seen it as reflecting generational differences. I don't know. Anyway, that's
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing, at least what I've been observing, particularly in the last year, and I don't know if this is pandemic influenced or not, but it's the trend seems to coincide with the pandemic. But there has been a lot of effort by international NGOs and other groups to really bring youth more into the forefront of their work. Um, the UN itself has been working to emphasize youth peace and security efforts and initiatives. There are growing youth movements for peace all around the world, several that we could look at. I always think of UNOY, which is the United Nations, what is it? I don't know, it's like the youth peace builders networks all around the world. And they're fantastic. They're sharp, again, courageous. I can't say enough about that. They're really willing to challenge things and take risks. I mean, youth are certainly greater risk takers than we adults for the most part. And so I think they're just really a long ignored group of really important social change agents that we have, we're learning to sort of harness a little bit more effectively and learn from at the same time.
I'm not really aware of I'm much more aware of youth as taking the leadership in many environmental issues, climate change issues. But I'm not aware of young people as particularly engaged with peace issues. So if that's the case, I'm behind the times and you need to bring me up to speed.
Sure. Or well, I'll share with you a few things that we the global. I haven't talked yet about a global campaign, but we've been slowly trying to develop more of a youth focus within both our programming and our outreach. And I have a group of youth interns who are Georgetown students who have been helping me design some programs. They hosted a webinar last year on youth perspectives on issues of racism. And how youth are working to combat issues of racism around the world, which is really remarkable. And our team just finished conducting a global survey on youth experiences and knowledge and awareness of various approaches to peace education and what they would like to see developed in their schools and universities. So we don't have the results of that yet to share with you. We're actually meeting about that later today, but hopefully we'll have some really great resources to
well, my experience when I was teaching was that I really did not, I taught a program in peace and conflict studies, which I organized at my campus, and I ran it for about 15 years. And I probably had 20 students on the average per year majoring, getting a degree in peace studies. It would show on their diploma, but they never became peace activists, ever. And what happened when there was an issue, because what I feel is that they wanted and needed and should be concerned about becoming more autonomous. So if there's to be a movement, it should be their movement. It is their movement. They want it to be in control. They don't join old people's movements. But when there was an issue, as for example, I remember the first Gulf War, the bombing of Iraq and so on, and it was quite remarkable. I had a peace resource center, 2 rooms full of documents and things. And this became sort of the meeting place for all of the students at the college. They came every noon hour and would plan their events. And there'd be about 30 people in this room. Well, maybe that's exaggerating, but high number for a thing. And then they would hold a rally and demonstrations and this and that against the war. But it was their event. It wasn't mine. I just sat in the corner and let them do as they wished. And then, when it was over, that was the end of the movement. There was nothing like that continued. So that was my impression, that it had to do with the usual tendency, a reasonable tendency for young people to want to become more autonomous and do things on their own. So if there's to be a movement, they will organize it and run it, and fine, you know. And then, but if you know they're through, that's the end of it.
Yeah, I'd have to think a little bit about whether that's changing or not. But I think I think that in general that's a really good approach. I think giving them that space for autonomy to develop their own sense of political agency is really important. It's unfortunate it didn't somehow translate into sustained engagement in the movements. But maybe, again, part of it is maybe related to the reasons they're not joining movements, maybe related to the fact that their voices have been generally excluded from those movements. I mean,
No, I don't think so, because every organization I've ever been part of spends half their time saying we've got to find ways of recruiting youth.
Right.
And they do their best, and it doesn't work. So that's why I'm so impressed that you're saying that there are groups now of youth. And I wonder, are they self-organizing? Are they doing it on their own, or are you pulling some strings behind the scene?
No, I think you're seeing a mix of both things emerging now. I think some existing groups are doing a good job of involving youth, but not in superficial ways. You know, not just filling a void or a seat, but actually giving them meaningful work to do and really trusting what they have to offer. And so I do think that there has been, I think there's been certain attitudinal changes with the leadership of these organizations, but youth are also self-organizing really effectively as well. And I think they have been more exposed to kind of critical perspectives on issues of war and peace and climate at a younger age. And so as they're moving into young adulthood, I think they are really actively engaged in trying to find ways to work on these issues.
Okay.
I think just in like the last 10 years, like looking at my students I teach, tremendous difference in knowledge and awareness of the issues.
Really?
Like to the point where, I mean, if I'm not doing my homework and finding out what's newest in terms of the cutting edge of the field and how people are thinking, that I'm behind, and I'm really excited about that. I really think that's a wonderful trend. I mean, that's not happening everywhere, obviously, but I do feel that
oh my goodness, I hear the opposite. And I don't know what to believe now. You're really throwing some curveballs at me. I really don't know what to expect, because I talked to, for example, I have friends out in BC, Mary Wynne Ashford and Jonathan Down, who work together in going to public schools, high schools mostly, I gather, and giving talks about nuclear weapons. And they say that the kids have never heard of it. That's absolutely totally alien. They didn't know there's a problem. And they basically thought, as many people say in my presence, oh, well, that's the 1960s or so that you were worried about. And that's an old-fashioned concern. It's not a problem anymore, baloney. Hell, it isn't. But apparently high school kids never get taught in school. And at my university, so far as I can tell, there's not a single course available in a university that has a campus with 40,000 or maybe more. I don't know. Last I heard it was 40,000, but that was 20 years ago. Students. And there's not a single course on nuclear weapons. And you can get a mixture of things on war. So they put together a program in peace studies at the university main campus. I was teaching at one of the suburban campuses in Mississauga. But the students are not, last I heard, absolutely not aware of military threats, that kind of issue. And you start from a very basic level in talking to them about it. So you're saying they're way ahead of you?
Well, maybe not in all things. Certainly, all right. So specific issues, things like nuclear weapons, I agree, is certainly missing from their awareness, and it's always a shocking topic when I bring it up in my courses. But I think part of that is it depends on where you're coming from in the world, I suppose. But that I mean, obviously we've dropped the ball in terms of talking about that in educational spaces. But it's no longer part of the conversation in the media and the news.
Mhm.
It's as you suggested. A lot of students think of it as some old-fashioned issue. But once they become aware of the real and significant threat, and start to challenge some of the myths behind nuclear proliferation, they become really engaged in the issue. I mean, look at ICANN, right? Who got the Nobel Peace Prize a few years back, and for being responsible for leading the effort to create the nuclear treaty. There were so many youth engaged in that movement around the world. I think that was really instrumental to it. Yeah, we have a lot of catching up to do on those issues. I think where we're seeing students having greater awareness are around these kind of broad issues that are obviously affecting all their lives. They're really pervasive. I mean, I can't speak for every corner of the world, but I would say, here in North America and the US in particular, it's hard to escape a moment in the daily news cycle where they aren't talking about issues of climate change, issues of structural violence related to the pandemic, or issues of the ongoing police violence and structural racism during the United States. So students are way ahead of the curve on thinking about and analyzing those issues of social justice in particular. But the really important work that peace education really began on in terms of challenging militarism, nuclear proliferation, and so forth and so on. That's not something that they're necessarily getting in schools. That's certainly not true.
But now, how many people come into your program? You have is it a degree program at Georgetown, or?
So the Justice and Peace Studies program at Georgetown, we have such popular interest in our offerings that we can't even keep up, quite honestly. I don't know the exact number of majors and minors off the top of my head, but we're at a point where most of our advanced courses we can't even open up to students outside of the program. So many students need it internally, and every year we just keep adding more and more and more. So that's good news, and we're seeing
that's wonderful news. That's really great.
I think we're seeing also a similar rise in peace studies programs around the country, around the world, actually. And it's an interesting place that we're in right now, because obviously students are really interested in these topics. But at the same time, we're having, universities are becoming more corporatized, and they're not terribly interested in this kind of learning. So there's that little bit of a tension that exists there. And so there's interesting dynamics playing out in the university level of peace education.
Now, let me think. I think of Georgetown, maybe without any evidence one way or another, but I think of it as somewhat different from some of the other universities. I remember when I was being interviewed, it was at American, Georgetown, and George Washington. All three interviewed me, I remember. And I thought of Georgetown as different because I think it's a Catholic university, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that I would wonder if the student body might be a more, I mean, if you go to a Catholic university when you have other options, it may be because you're pretty damn Catholic or something.
Maybe, obviously it's a Jesuit institution, so there's a strong social justice influence within the university. I mean, I don't think that students are necessarily attracted to it because of a Catholic background. I don't know. I would guess. Okay. I don't really know. I mean, I don't know the data on this, but
I have another friend that I've interviewed a couple of times who teaches at St. Thomas More College in Saskatchewan, which is a Catholic college within the University of Saskatchewan. And he has the same kind of report that you are giving me, that these students are extremely engaged. And I asked him, for example, do you go out in the street and get students to go with you and demonstrate? And he said, my students make sure I come with them.
Right.
I love that. But but also I maybe I should have asked him the question I just asked you. Does it reflect a different student body from the population of, say, American or George Washington, or what's the other one in Virginia, George Mason?
Mason.
Those are all local
Yeah.
universities, aren't they? And all with strong programs in the social sciences.
Yeah, and all have various programs in peace-related fields too. And having taught at both George Washington, George Mason, and now at Georgetown, all three Georges.
Oh yeah.
Which I jokingly say makes me Georges. I think there are similarities in the student body, but there are certainly differences. You certainly at Georgetown, well, I wouldn't say everyone. Certainly, not all the students have Catholic backgrounds. A lot of them have gone to like Jesuit schools, high schools. So they've been introduced to some of the social justice values in advance, but not all of them. There's other aspects that are really important to Georgetown and its culture in general. So, for example, at Georgetown, there exists the Center for Social Justice Teaching, Research and Social Justice Teaching and Research. This is a university-wide center that works with students, helps place them in internships and other kinds of programs where they can experiential learning programs and they can do and engage in social justice work in local community groups, local schools, and other places. And a good number of Georgetown students take advantage of the programs that they offer. So there is a strong cultural there's one of the really remarkable things that played out in Georgetown 2-3 years ago now was that there was a pretty significant student-led effort to work towards providing reparations for the descendants of slaves upon which Georgetown was founded. So students are deeply, certainly very deeply engaged. George Mason, they have now there used to be the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution, has just now been renamed the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of something. I don't know the name off it's just changed in the last 6 months or so.
That's news to me. I didn't know that, but it's very appropriate, isn't it?
Yeah. So, well, of course, that program is mostly at a graduate level, so it's a different population that's involved there. George Washington has a smaller peace studies program, but one of the things that they've done really intelligently in the way they designed it is they open up their peace studies intro course as meeting one of its kind of core university requirements that all students need to take. I mean, there are other courses they could choose from, but a lot of students gravitate towards it because I think they're really interested. And I always thought it was a challenge when I would teach that course there. I think a lot of students showed up because they thought it was just going to be easy. Right?
And you taught it.
Yeah, and I taught it, and so I saw that as a challenge. My job was to try to light a fire in them, to be more critical and more engaged in their world, and to at least walk out of that course with peace studies providing a lens for how they could look at the world around them, but also all their other studies, to see kind of challenge some of the perspectives maybe they were learning from political science or international relations courses. I always find it fascinating. Any students that I have that take my Justice and Peace Studies courses who maybe are majoring in international relations at any of these institutions, they always walk away saying, whoa, that really challenges a lot of things that I've been learning for the last 3 or 4 years. And so.
Well, here's another thing that happened to me. And I just wonder how widely that tendency exists. And that is, I organized the Peace and Conflict program, which meant I went around to all the people teaching in history and political science and even psychology and sociology and a number of different philosophy and everything. And I tried to find courses that belonged sort of within this general framework. well, everybody was glad to play except the political scientists. And they wouldn't allow me to count political science toward a degree in peace studies because they owned the field. And they basically thought that we were interlopers, had no business treading on their territory. Well, I'm imputing things to them that I shouldn't without actually hearing that from their voice. But that was my interpretation of what it meant. They didn't like the idea. Have you encountered that kind of territorial imperialism or something?
Oh, absolutely. I won't say what specific institution, but if anyone did their homework, they could probably figure it out. I'll give a story that illustrates this really well. So I was teaching a special seminar on rethinking global security with a small group of students a few years back. Really fascinating, enlightening course, but the idea was to really stretch our boundaries of our imagination, to really kind of apply some lenses of peace research to rethink a militarized approach to global security, what the world could look like if we could model an approach that embraced more of a view of human security and more people-centered approach and less military and so forth and so on. And so my students were given kind of a final assignment where they were going to develop some aspect of this new system design. And we wanted to have a session, a public kind of, we have so many webinars now, I forget, a small conference, an in-person thing, imagine that, where they're going to share these ideas. And we wanted to bring in faculty from international relations and the global security program to have a conversation to hear the voices of these students, but then to have conversations with these academic scholars on their views for like, how can we radically rethink global security, what needs to be done, and so forth. So the students with my support, we wrote to, I think, close to 40 different faculty members. Every single one of them turned us down to join us on this panel.
Oh my
so in very polite terms, but some whatever scheduling things that they said they had or whatever. But so it was. But that's not a terrible surprise to me. I mean, there are certain things that we certainly do. I think that there are some territorial turf wars in academia. There always have been. And peace studies and peace education is a very interdisciplinary, and I would say more of a transdisciplinary field where we see the core problem is violence, and we need to apply all these different academic lenses to trying to unpack that problem. We all have something to contribute to it. And if we can't do that, we're never going to get, we're going to just continue to have this impasse. But then there are also, I feel, I mean, this is my perspective. I still feel like a lot of global security and international relations programs have not evolved much in the last half century. So they're still teaching schools of realism and rooting whole theories of security that are rooted in the idea that humans are innately violent, and then therefore we need violent mechanisms to control people. These are views that are, quite honestly, they're ancient, and they haven't evolved. I mean, it's a canon they've been producing and reproducing for years and years and years. And I think a lot of what peace studies have to offer can be a direct challenge to that. So I can understand that, and I've been trying to figure out how do we, what kind of fig leaf do I need to offer to be able to, reach across those aisles and have those conversations with those folks. And I'm certainly open to challenging assumptions, naive assumptions I might have about global security, and so forth. But we need to have those conversations if we're going to be able to move forward.
Well, one of the things that occurs to me is you are located in the nation's capital. And I would assume, and this is just a guess, that people who want to have a role in government probably would like to hang out in the vicinity. So I would wonder whether or not the political science departments and international relations departments and so on might be attracting, voluntarily or not, attracting people who want to have a role in government, which means, of course, you've got to play by the rules that are part of our government, and we know what the rules are. It's definitely a military oriented government. I don't know anybody in government who is enthusiastic about teaching how to do civil resistance.
Right. I mean, I certainly think that's a pretty reasonable assumption in terms of both the types of students those programs attract, but also the faculty. So in all these institutions, Georgetown, George Washington, George Mason, you'll see a lot of faculty who have worked in government, in the security fields, or in security related think tanks and so forth. So that these are sort of normal expectations.
But on the other hand, there are people like you, and there are people like Mubarak Awad, who's in the vicinity, and so on, and all these programs that you've mentioned that are thriving, I presume. But maybe just there's a bigger gulf between what you do and what the standard assumptions are in, say, the political science department, and certainly in the Pentagon.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Or even locally here with certain views and attitudes, like coming out of the United States Institute of Peace, which is another kind of interesting entity that exists somewhere, between, kind of a government entity and a non-governmental entity in terms of the views it promotes and so forth and so on.
I'd like your thoughts about that place. I took a course there once just to check it out. It looked empty. It's this gorgeous building, this spectacularly beautiful architecture, and there was nobody there. Or it felt very hollow, and I didn't get any sense that there was a ferment of activism there at all. So I didn't know what to make of it. I was just there less than a week, but it was a very I went to try to check it out, and I came away without any sense that I knew what I just discovered. What goes on there? What's your impression? Whose side are they on?
Depending on who you ask that question to, you're going to get very different responses. My experience with USIP has been generally very, very positive over the years. I think internally you have really great staff who are, I think, really kind of well versed in fields of peace building and peacemaking, and even looking at issues of civil resistance. And I think they've done, the folks who are in charge of sort of their educational outreach do really good work. But the institution is obviously deeply politicized, right? So while it is supposedly an independent institution, its governing board is politically appointed. And typically, and I might have this wrong, but I seem to recall that this is the way it is that it's evenly divided sort of between the two parties in terms of the board's leadership. And
well, I can't say that either of the two parties looks like a party of peace to me.
No, not terribly, not terribly. I think there's been a lot of kind of political turf wars over the years with the institute. On one hand, we have some people will push back on it, say, well, isn't that sort of what the State Department exists for in terms of their international outreach and training that they might do. But I think they walk a fine line, and in general, I think they've done a really good job over the years of trying to gently persuade politics in a more peaceful direction. I think a lot of people say they come up short of being a true peace institute. I think what you'll hear more is that they emphasize conflict management as their primary, orientation in terms of the way that they kind of train and help operationalize work in the field. Certainly trying to reduce, violent mechanisms and so forth and so on.
Okay, let me see if it is reflected in something that I understand has gone on or is going on, which I don't know anything about. And that is, I'm occasionally in touch with people at Peter Ackerman's outfit, the Institute for Nonviolent Conflict. Is that the name of it? Institute International, I can't remember.
Yeah, IC,
Yes.
IPNC, the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict.
Yeah, okay. Now, I understand they have moved to a building that is adjoining and is probably part of the U.S. Institute of Peace. There's a big, ugly building right next door to this gorgeous building. And I didn't even notice the ugly building, but that's where they, I believe, were moving. Now, that means that they're somehow affiliating or something with that outfit. Now, that was news I heard 6 or 8 months ago. Do you know anything about that and what that means?
Yeah, I heard that too, and I don't know much more about it nor what it means. I don't know that necessarily means a specific affiliation. So I know, for example, at once upon a time, at least I heard these rumors that USIP was struggling financially, as they always are, because their budgets are never really what they asked for. And in that big, brand new, beautiful building, I've often heard that they were trying to like rent out some space to some like-minded organizations. So I don't know if that's what's happening or not. I'd have to, talk to the folks over at ICNC. But yeah, I've never really followed up on that. I'm certainly curious.
Okay, well, we both could go do a little detective work before we start opining on the subject.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we should go back to this Institute for Peace, because you have every couple of years you have like a training or a conference, or what is it you put on? And tell me about the most recent one.
Yeah, so I don't know, the training really fits the bill. Training seems to be, like it imposes or implies kind of a top-down thing that we're providing some specific skills, et cetera. I don't know if conference really fits the bill either, because it's definitely not a conference. Again, I describe it more as
it goes on for weeks or something. Is that right?
it goes on. It's typically 7 days, intensive days. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, and then you're dreaming about it too. But I describe it better as sort of a learning community, kind of learning laboratory, where everyone is somehow contributing to the program and learning from each other. In that space. We actually had plans to be in Mexico City this summer.
Oh.
But because of COVID restrictions, we're postponing that. As you can imagine, the way I'm describing it, this sort of the in-person aspect of this is really important. We're going to have a few virtual events later this summer to kind of fill the void, but we're going to postpone until next summer, the summer of
and then do it in Mexico City or elsewhere?
Yeah, we're going to be in Mexico City, a little ecological retreat center. That's where we'll be held. And we're going to open up the Institute for the first time now, and it's 30, almost now 40 years. Is that right? My goodness, almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years next summer. We're going to actually open up the Institute at the end for 2 days for a much larger conference. So we'll go from 60 or 70 people to a few hundred people, with the opportunity. Our goal is to try to bring in more educators from Mexico to be able to hear and learn from what was happening during that week, but also to bring in other guests from around the world to share in a more kind of traditional conference format.
Who puts on this? It must be an expensive operation.
Well, it is it's an interesting challenge organizing it. But one of the reasons we went to an every other year model is that we're really trying to subsidize the cost and make it affordable for people. So, for example, the fees that we had kind of calculated for Mexico would have been for the whole week. Everything included food, lodging, local transportation, materials, around $500 US. Pretty remarkable. You can't do anything in the world for $500 for a week, right?
You couldn't even buy a hotel room for that anywhere.
Exactly. So we always try to be really kind of creative and dynamic, work on a shoestring, but we also worked upon a lot of different kind of sponsors. We get grant-based support. Sometimes we get support from various development agencies around the world. So the previous institute that we hosted was most previous was back in 2019 in Cyprus. So we were actually held our institute in the buffer zone, but we had support from the European Union
That's fun.
yeah.
You in the buffer zone. Oh my goodness. I didn't know there was anything in the buffer zone.
Well, it's there's not a lot in the buffer zone. There is in the center of Nicosia. There is a kind of an area of buildings that the UN peacekeepers obviously manage, but there is a community center there called the Home for Cooperation that hosts a number of different NGOs from both sides. NGOs who have the goal of reunifying Cyprus and kind of working across the divides. So we worked.
How long has it existed? You know, because
cooperation.
Yeah, that outfit. Because I'll tell you why I'm asking. I first met a friend of mine named David Last, who's a professor at the Royal Military College, but he used to be very involved with teaching peacekeeping. And he was based in Cyprus for a long time. So the way I met him was he wrote me once, a good 25 years ago, asking what I knew about peace gardens, because his notion was to turn the buffer zone into a peace garden, which would be maintained by the young militants on both sides, get them to work together in creating this garden. And what did I know about peace gardens? Well, I knew nothing about peace gardens, but we had an interesting conversation and then gradually got to know each other. So I think that was, when the Canadians were in Cyprus, it's a long time ago. And I wonder if maybe this wasn't an outcome of that, but somebody with the same bright idea, bring people together to do things cooperatively.
I'm going to guess around at least 20 years or so now. NGO that's housed there called the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research. And they are the ones that they've been operating a number of peace education programs. They have one project that's been receiving all kinds of awards called the Imagine Project. And in particular, that brings together young kids in elementary schools from both sides, which is a really interesting challenge. Of course, they don't even speak the same language at that age, but they come together after their teachers are kind of trained and they do some preparatory work and programs, and they come together for a couple series of events and experiences in the buffer zone. We had our institute there in the buffer zone. Our theme that we brought people together from around the world to explore was this idea of educating for peace in divided societies. And so obviously there is a very physical, visible manifestation of that there, but we have all kinds of divided issues around the world: political polarization and ethnic divisions and so forth and so on.
By the way, you said they don't speak the same language. I had never thought about that. Turkish and Greek? Do they call themselves Cypriots? Do they both groups call themselves Cypriots, or do they say I'm a Turk or I'm a Greek?
I better get this right from the Cyprus. So, eventually, as they get older, I do believe both school systems teach English, so there would be a common language eventually to work with. I don't know so much about. I can't guarantee that that's necessarily the case in the North. The North is not considered an official state entity politically, so it's more of a kind of considered like a Turkish occupation of that space. To even import anything into the Turkish North, it has to come through Turkey and there.
I don't know whether this is a fair question, but do you think it is Turkey that is demanding a continuation of that hardline approach, or is it the people themselves there who are intransigent?
A combination of factors. I'm certain. Certainly, there's pressure coming from Turkey, but I think a lot of the political attitude comes from the local leadership as well.
Because you would have thought, in the days when Turkey was still hoping to join the EU and NATO and everything else good and holy, you would have thought they would be more amenable to finding a solution to the Cyprus dispute.
Yeah.
But they didn't seem to, and now I'm not surprised that they're being kind of difficult.
Yeah, well, I mean, in fairness, certainly terrible political blunders on both sides over the years. You can't really point fingers at one side or the other.
Really? Okay.
I mean, just looking at, I mean, what I'm most familiar with, just sort of the educational climates there, and so both in the North and in the South, they continue to promote very one-sided historical narratives in educational systems. So that's deeply problematic. And so, yeah, there have been efforts and attempts at reforming that, but those kind of, get changed with the political winds. So they haven't been well sustained over time.
Mm-hmm.
So these are, we have to take in the bigger picture on that problem.
Okay, now tell me more about these events. People come together for people like peace educators or what else? People who work in higher education, but what other kinds of folks do you bring together?
So we have, academics, school teachers, researchers, but we also get a handful of people over the years who are, policymakers who maybe work with ministries of education in various countries. We also work with a lot of non-formal educators who work through, NGOs and faith-based organizations who might be doing peace and social justice work. So we get sorry, my dog was having a moment.
Yeah.
So we get a very kind of rich mix. We also get a handful of students. We usually try to pencil in a few spots so students can really be there as well.
Okay. That sounds a little bit like what Peter Ackerman was doing at Tufts University every summer. And I think they were doing it at some other places. They did it at, when Budapest had that Central European University, they were doing it there. And maybe others, I don't know. But I gather that has ended. He would bring in, 50 young professionals. They weren't necessarily all, or even mainly, peace educators, but people who were things like editors of newspapers or something of that kind, mostly, in their 30s or so, I think, and have a training for a week or two on nonviolence and that sort of thing. But I think he stopped doing that, and it must have been a very pricey thing to do, to bring people from all over the world for an event like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine. I feel that they're still doing it, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to kind of look into that.
Okay.
My sense is they're still pretty active in doing it.
Well, it's such a great idea. When you meet people in that kind of setting, I think sometimes really important relationships get established that later on turn out to be important.
Yeah, that's really important to us too.
Yeah, when we started, I had in mind that it would be fun to talk about our various ideas of how to influence culture, because I don't think we have a lot of time left for that, but I would like your thoughts. The main goal often is to change policy, but there are other institutions that are probably better suited, NGOs that are better suited to pressuring governments to adopt this policy or that policy, where universities and other peace education institutions are, I think, looking to change general attitudes in a longer, more diffuse way. That is, change the culture. Yeah. And I don't know whether you see it that way or not, but I wonder, I've been giving a lot more thought about how to change culture in away from the basic militaristic assumptions that I think pervade our society, modern society everywhere. It's not ours in particular. It's every society that has a TV set and a computer with a with the internet on it. We've all got the same culture in a sense nowadays. What are your thoughts about priorities and tactics of influencing political culture? In 30 words or less.
30 words or less. I don't have much time left. I got a lot of thoughts on that. I think you're right, and then the peace education is often oriented towards this kind of culture of peace work, and I think it's really important. And we've actually seen a lot of NGOs and university programs adopt, for example, like the framework of the UN Declaration and Program of Action for Culture of Peace, which puts peace education as one of its main spokes of its efforts. And so, yeah, absolutely, we need to be working, developing, those attitudes, beliefs, and dispositions that are necessary to challenge a culture of violence and build a culture of peace. I think thinking about it, like in terms of putting forward maybe a theory of change about how that happens, I think that the way that at least we approach it in our experience of peace education, I'm speaking about, kind of wearing my hat of working very internationally through the Institute and the global campaign. I think about it very holistically. The effort of creating cultural change is one that requires us working for personal change, relational change, structural change, and then ultimately cultural change. So changing, understanding that changing in one is going to influence the other, and so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually kind of the backbone of what the Global Campaign for Peace education it was built upon. So I got to get in a little word on that real quickly too. So
yeah, sure.
The campaign was launched in 1999 at the Hague Appeal for Peace Civil Society Conference that was held in The Hague in the Netherlands. So this was the world's largest civil society peace conference, right? On the 100th year anniversary of the first Hague Peace Conference. Mm-hmm. And so this brought together all these educators and activists around the world to kind of think about the role of ending all wars. And they came up with this Hague Agenda for Peace and Justice for the 21st century, which outlines a whole set of different principles of things that you need to be able to work towards a peace system in the world. But one of the other campaigns that was launched then was the Global Campaign. The campaign statement, I'll just read it to you because it gets to this cultural here. For the Global Campaign, it states that a culture of peace will be achieved when citizens of the world understand global problems, have the skills to resolve conflict constructively, know and live by international standards of human rights, gender and racial equality, appreciate cultural diversity, and respect the integrity of the earth. And such learning cannot be achieved without intentional, sustained, and systematic education for peace. So that is really at the heart of what the Global Campaign is about, is building and advocating for public awareness and political support of peace education, not just in schools, but also non-formally through civil society efforts and community level interventions. One of the most important things that we really try to emphasize is the need to promote teacher training in peace education as well. It's one thing to try to push a curriculum on people who don't believe it. It doesn't work, right? But ultimately, I would say, in terms of my theory of change, and I think we'll probably agree on this, is that the most sustainable cultural change is the kind of change that comes from below, right? And this is also a very kind of feminist perspective, and obviously a lot of feminist influences in the field of peace education. So this kind of bottom-up approach emphasizes changing in minds and attitudes, as opposed to doing kind of top-down structural changes that kind of impose change upon a society. It doesn't work. We actually should be looking to figure out how to make those two strategies work in tandem a little bit more effectively, because certainly they can work that way. Mm-hmm. But that's, I think, what we're really going for.
Well, to what extent, or how are you organized? Do you have members? Do you have groups that are affiliated? Are you part of something else, or are you independent? Where do you get your money? Things like that.
So yeah, the global campaign is I like to think of it more as a kind of a global social movement. So it is a loose-knit network of educators, activists, advocates, and policymakers and others who are members in the sense that they agree to support the goals of the global campaign and work towards that in advocacy and in practice. More recently, we've been working to create a global coalition of organizations around the world so we also recognize that change is most effective when we're kind of working at a coalitional level with and through existing institutions that are all working on different parts of the peace puzzle, but see peace education is really critical to their work.
To what extent do you include organizations that are not normally defined as peace groups? For example, I'm doing this thing, a project Save the World, and we have 6 global threats. War and weapons is just one of them. That's the peace segment. But we also have global warming. We have famine, pandemics, radioactive contamination, and cyber attacks. Mm-hmm. So all of those we see them as interdependent and linked. They're not normally considered part of peace actions. And they function more or less as in separate silos. For example, the pandemics group, they're mostly run by governments, public health departments and officials and things like that. But really, we need to think of ourselves as all part of the same project. And I don't know another group that has as broad a definition as that. When you say you're looking to be more inclusive, how wide a span of inclusion are you aiming for?
I don't have a specific, parameters that we've set for that necessarily, but all those things that you've just described to me represent various global threats to peace. They all represent various forms of violence that we need to address. There's peace education isn't just concerned with the traditional kind of global threats of militarism and forms of direct violence. It's also concerned with various things like the various forms of structural violence that we're seeing again in the world these days in terms of issues of structural racism and social justice issues as well. All those things kind of weave together in creating this broader culture of violence, right? So for us, we certainly are trying to help develop a more holistic understanding and definition of what peace is and how we need to be working at all these various intersectional levels to achieve it. And so for us, we're not going to exclude people. That's not our intention, but we really want those just simply an embracing of our basic values. And I think people are getting to see now that education, whatever the issues they're tackling, it plays such a vital role in working towards the cultural change that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. That you can't do it without it. So we've tried for too long, right?
Absolutely. It's been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate it, Tony, and it's great to meet you.
I really enjoyed it myself. We have a lot to follow up on. I'm looking forward to maybe a future conversation as well.
Indeed. Carry on. Bye.
Bye.